This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Tremors hit Cape Town after a strong earthquake off the South African coast. Remains of 117 Chinese war heroes who died in the Korean War repatriated from South Korea. And we update you on continuing efforts to contain the coronavirus pandemic in Africa. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live. I am Peninah Karibe. Let's have a look at other stories lined up this hour. More African countries step up efforts to revive their tourism industries after COVID-19 disruptions. And in sports, South Africans looking to grow in prominence at continental and global rally events. We begin in South Africa, where 6.1 magnitude earthquake struck offshore on Saturday. That's according to the U.S. Geological Survey. A subsequent tremor with a 2.3 magnitude struck the country's southern coastline on Sunday. According to the Council for Geoscience, this is the second earthquake to strike the city of Cape Town over the weekend. The first was a 2.5 magnitude tremor that occurred on Saturday night at a depth of 10 kilometers. Residents of Cape Town posted on social media that they had felt the ground shake for 5 seconds. The Council for Geoscience has assured the public that there is no imminent threat to the area. CGTN's Renee Delcam joins us now from Cape Town for more on this. Renee, what's the latest on that quake that struck off the South African coast?
Well, I must tell you that many people I've spoken to so far in Cape Town have said it was the scariest moment of their lives. I myself did not experience the earthquake because it struck mostly the northern suburbs of Cape Town. So I did not, unfortunately, I cannot give you first-hand knowledge, but people have reported their homes shaking, windows rattling. People said that they felt the earth move and they heard a very loud rumbling sound. And as it climaxed, parts of their homes were shaking, the windows rattling, chandeliers, etc. So as you said, it was at about a depth of 10 kilometers out to sea, over 600 kilometers, 1,600 kilometers off the South African coastline. But the Council for Geoscience said that we cannot relate the two phenomena. We cannot say that the tremors felt on land in Cape Town are related to the earthquake out at sea just after 7 last night. So far in Cape Town, it is important to stress there have been no reports of casualties or damage. Also no tsunami warnings so far. Now, some people were concerned because the areas that felt the tremor last night is the same area where we have the Koeberg nuclear plant. But we are told that the Koeberg nuclear plant was built to withstand a 7 magnitude earthquake. So at this stage, no imminent threat with regard to that. That's what we've been told by the experts.
And Renee, are authorities anticipating more tremors around Cape Town, and what advisories have been issued?
Well, so far, the advisories are saying, as you said, no imminent threat of damage or to lives at this stage. But a second tremor was said to be felt just after 9, just over 3 hours ago on Sunday morning. I didn't feel any shaking, but I heard a loud sound at around that time. It sounded like a very loud truck off in the distance. Whether or not what I heard was the tremor, I don't know. I'm still trying to find out more from the experts. But people, once again, when I spoke to people who experienced that this morning, saying it was extremely scary. That is the one word that has been used over and over again. And I do remember that the one big tremor we had in South Africa in 1969, people who have related that story to me over the years have used exactly the same words to describe that experience. But once again, just to reiterate, no reports of casualties or damage at this stage. And very important, because this is what many people are fearing, no tsunami warning has been issued.
And that should be good news, Renee. Thank you very much for that update. Renee Delcam on the line from Cape Town in South Africa. A tragic coal mine accident in southwestern China has left 16 miners dead. Authorities of Chongqing City say the miners died of carbon monoxide poisoning after a conveyor belt caught fire. One person was brought out alive but is in critical condition. A team of 75 rescue workers and 30 medics were deployed to the scene. China's northeastern city of Xinjiang has welcomed the remains of 117 Chinese war heroes who died in the Korean War. They were repatriated from South Korea in the 7th such transfer since Seoul and Beijing have signed a handover agreement several years ago. Our reporter Sun Tianyuan is in Xinjiang.
I'm at Xinjiang's international airport where a special plane loaded with remains and belongings of 117 Chinese war heroes killed in the Korean War 70 years ago has arrived from Incheon, South Korea. Behind me is the Y-20, China's home-developed transport aircraft that has flown a solo mission of such kind for the first time, escorted by fighter jets earlier this morning. Chinese authorities, including Vice Premier Sun Chunlan and Korean War veterans, soldiers and students attended a ceremony to pay tribute to the fallen heroes, and after that, the honor guard are scheduled to escort the caskets across the city to Xinjiang's cemetery for Korean War martyrs, where hundreds of soldiers are buried. And tomorrow the martyrs will be buried next to their comrades in an underground tomb, and this year's burial is expected to be the second largest after nearly 400 Chinese soldiers were laid to rest in 2014. The remains are the 7th batch China has received from South Korea since 2014, and that's when the transfers first began. The handover has been viewed by many as a symbol of goodwill by Seoul, and it's one of the appreciated by China. And two countries are continuing developing a healthy and stable relationship years after the war, even though they were enemies 70 years ago. Between 2014 and last year, the remains of nearly 600 Chinese soldiers were sent back from South Korea. And Seoul has agreed to continue cooperating with Beijing to recover the remains of more Chinese soldiers and finally return them to the resting place in their home country.
It's the 7th such ceremony to be held after Beijing and Seoul reached an agreement back in 2013. Gao Yiming has more.
March 28, 2014, at Shenyang Taoxian Airport in China's northeast. Inside the boxes include skeletal remains, as well as personal possessions such as shoes and stamps of Chinese volunteer soldiers who perished during the 3-year Korean War. Decorated in China's national flag, fighter jets escorted them home across the Yellow Sea. Soldiers hold welcome banners and comrades stand in salute. For this moment, they had waited for decades.
We must never forget the sacrifices of those who died and to treat them as spiritual role models.
Over 190,000 Chinese soldiers died in the war to resist U.S. aggression and aid Korea, but very few were buried on their homeland. A total of 599 have been returned over the past 6 years, after Beijing and Seoul came to an agreement in 2013. All of them have been buried in Xinjiang Martyrs Cemetery, which was first established in 1951.
Since 1993, I have come to the cemetery on my own every year, just before Tomb Sweeping Festival. At first, it was spontaneous. Nowadays, though, there are fewer and fewer living veterans, so we come to pay respects in groups.
This year, 117 fallen heroes from the war are returning to China. They had to wait a few months longer than anticipated because of the coronavirus pandemic. But they're finally now ready to rest beside their comrades back on home soil. Gao Yiming, CGTN.
The Chinese People's Volunteer Army significantly contributed in the Korean War against the U.S. They fought side by side with the Army of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea between 1950 and 1953. Here's more about their history.
The Chinese People's Volunteer Army was the armed expatriate volunteer forces deployed by the People's Republic of China during the Korean War. On October 19, 1950, at the request of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the forces crossed the Yalu River to aid the DPRK and completely withdrew by 1958. In January 1958, Beijing and Pyongyang announced a joint declaration. China decided to withdraw all its soldiers from the DPRK in 3 waves before October 1958. On October 25, 1958, a total of more than 70,000 people, including the headquarters, 3 divisions, and the logistical support forces of the Chinese Volunteer Army, left for home. Over the 8 years of war, a total of 2.9 million CPV soldiers entered the battlefield, and over 197 of them gave their lives.
Thousands of protesters gathered outside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's residence in Jerusalem on Saturday, demanding his resignation. Some have been arrested amid clashes with police. Police say most protesters had complied with social distancing and face mask rules. An initial lockdown was imposed by Netanyahu's government on September 18th. It seeks to limit group prayers and businesses by keeping Israelis at home. Critics allege that the government's objective is to prevent the rising protests over criminal charges against the Prime Minister and the mishandling of the coronavirus crisis. Netanyahu rejected the allegations, calling protesters anarchists and loonies. Meanwhile, Israel's health system is in danger of collapse as hospitals struggle to treat COVID-19 patients. CGTN's Stephanie Fried reports.
Maximum occupancy, patients lining the corridors. Increasingly, this is the new normal in Israel's overloaded hospitals. The country's COVID-19 cases are hitting record high numbers. The government's response? A countrywide lockdown.
A growing number of medical and science experts say Israel's lockdown is unnecessary and will be ineffective. Inside the hospital wards, the physicians tell a different story.
Hospital occupancy is beyond 100% capacity.
It's not rare to see ambulances with COVID-19 patients waiting outside of the ED, and there's no room for them. They are many times waiting for 1 hour, 2 hours until we can receive them.
The scramble to expand coronavirus treatment is on. The internal medicine wing converted 3 of its departments to COVID-19 wards. The ICU is also being converted.
If you ask me whether I'm on the brink of falling into the black hole or inside it, we're already inside it.
The biggest concern isn't bed or equipment shortages.
What we are lacking right now is personnel, nurses and physicians. That is the main issue right now in our ED and in Israel.
This hospital staff is down by 10%. Most are in quarantine after either contracting COVID-19 or coming into direct contact with an infected person. Those not in quarantine have been working around the clock since March and are increasingly collapsing from fatigue. Israel's health ministry director warns the system is facing a state of emergency. Stephanie Fried, CGTN, Central Israel.
Protesters at an anti-lockdown rally in London have clashed with police. The police said 9 officers were injured and 16 people were arrested. It's the second weekend of demonstrations against pandemic restrictions in the UK that recently tightened due to a sharp rise in coronavirus cases. Thousands of people took to the streets chanting freedom and carrying banners saying, "We do not consent." The police ordered the protesters to disperse because demonstrators had failed to socially distance or wear masks. Time for us now to take a quick break. Coming up on the program, we update you on continuing efforts to contain the coronavirus pandemic in Africa, and how authorities in Nigeria are using digital technology to combat gender-based violence.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent. to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Welcome back. In Tunisia, thousands of agents are being deployed nationwide to enforce government health measures put in place to curb the spread of COVID-19. There are concerns of a second wave of infections in the country after a spike in coronavirus cases. CGTN's Adnet Shawashi reports.
The national campaign kicked off in 24 regions across the country. Public health inspectors did not tolerate any breach to the health protocol.
We have launched this sanitary and healthcare control campaign in partnership with many ministries. We're checking if businesses are respecting the strict health protocol put in place by the COVID-19 task force. Wearing face masks, using hand sanitizers, and social distancing are mandatory.
Hundreds of businesses were sanctioned for disrespecting the prevention measures. This restaurant manager says he accepts the decision of the authorities because he did not use protective face masks.
I was fined for not wearing face masks. I'm surprised because I did not expect such a reaction from the healthcare control units. From now on, I'll provide face masks and all the necessary equipment to my employees. This is how we can protect ourselves and save lives.
Tamim Shushan owns a coffee shop in downtown Tunis. He was fined around $50 for non-compliance with social distancing measures.
The cafe is empty. I'm fined because there are more tables and chairs than what's allowed. From now on, I'll take the social distancing measures into consideration and avoid an overcrowded coffee shop.
Prime Minister Hisham Meshishi announced that the state will endeavor to flatten out the curve to curb the resurgence of the coronavirus and isolate the regions classified as hotspots. Meshishi added that the government will not order to return to the general lockdown.
The country's Prime Minister has recently declared that since the beginning of the pandemic, the government has been careful to ensure a balance between economic and health needs. According to the latest data of the Health Ministry, 10 delegations are classified as hotspots. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Meanwhile, Libyans are struggling to follow measures to contain the spread of the coronavirus in the face of power cuts and water shortages. And an economy devastated by war, the prices of masks and disinfectant have all surged. Tulisha Balala has more.
Libya has recorded over 22,000 cases of COVID-19. Government has urged for people to exercise precaution, to wear masks, use hand sanitizer and remain vigilant.
This is the third and final day of the National Community Awareness Campaign launched by the National Center for Disease Control in coordination with the municipality of Souk Al-Jamaa as a first step, in order to launch in other municipalities in Greater Tripoli. Of course, the campaign brings community awareness for the citizens to live with the coronavirus, especially in the spread of the disease during the fourth stage, since the beginning from the first case.
Around 80% of positive cases are asymptomatic. Due to lack of beds in hospitals, many have been urged to self-isolate in their homes. But this too has brought its own problems.
With the pressure on the citizens with the lack of electricity and water, they come to public places to take a rest or for fresh air. I am one of the citizens coming to this place. I do not have anything. I am running away from the issue of water and electricity cuts. We are forced to leave even though I know the situation and I am one of the people who does not wear a face mask.
Libya has been marred in chaos since 2011. Daily life for many Libyans is hard under a struggling economy. As the pandemic continues, the prices of masks, disposable gloves and disinfectant have all surged.
There are no masks. The price of the face mask reached 2 Libyan dinars. Each family needs a daily average of 5-10 dinars to spend on face masks when they enter a food store or market to buy vegetables. How can they support their home with so much expenses?
Staying safe and earning a living is all that many want. Thuli Shabalala, CGTN.
The Nigerian government has launched a new digital platform to combat gender-based violence. Nigeria has experienced a surge in sexual and gender-based violence, especially during the COVID-19 lockdown. The UN Population Fund reported that no less than 80 million women and girls are victims of gender-based violence. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam has the details.
16, pregnant and unsure of what becomes of her future. That's the fate of Anna, whose identity is being concealed as she is a minor. She was abducted, raped and impregnated by a man who treated injuries she had sustained in a fire accident. And for nearly 6 months, no one knew her whereabouts.
He knows the time that my mom used to go to work, nobody is at home. So he came back and said that why is it that I did not call him? And I said that I don't have phone and I cannot call him. And he was threatening me that if I do not call him, that he can harm me, that I know that he's a medical doctor, that he can make my hand rot and he can make me smell. He took me to their house. When he took me to their house, he did not used to allow me to come outside. Every time he used to beat me, I used to tell him that I'm going home. He said that he have already settled with my parents. It has affected me a lot because I'm in 16 years and I'm already pregnant, so that's affected me a lot. My education, my everything.
Just like Anna, 28% of Nigerian women aged 25 to 29 have experienced some form of violence since age 15. That's according to statistics released by the country's Women Affairs Ministry. What's more worrying are increased cases of sexual and gender-based violence during the COVID-19 lockdown, as victims were forced to remain in the same space with their abusers. The government has been partnering with private organizations to combat the issue. The latest of such efforts is the launch of a digital platform featuring anonymity and a 24-hour automated call service to aid SGBV reporting and action.
Our intention was to maximize the potentials of technology in redefining response and providing support in gender-based violence issues through a multi-sectoral partner network. We came up with OnSub. OnSub employs a web and mobile application for multi-sectoral case management, data collection, and analytics, GBV reporting, and will eventually feature an interactive voice response system for reporting and data collection in the grassroots and digitally excluded communities.
Like every pervasive national and global problem, solo efforts and small-scale cooperation may help a great deal, but such efforts will not be able to deliver the desired durable solutions to stem the tide of the shadow pandemic of rape and SDBV. It is therefore in furtherance of the Commission's quest for a coordinated response, which recognizes the contributions of each and every responder in their various corners, feeding into a well-coordinated system with emphasis on scientifically disaggregated data, clear referral pathways, and effective monitoring, that the Commission, in collaboration with its partners, is launching the UNSUB high-tech platform today.
A UN Population Fund study shows that despite the high rate of sexual and gender-based violence in Nigeria, less than 15% of the reported cases are pursued to a logical conclusion. Many alleged offenders walk freely without being prosecuted. Many of the victims, like Anna, don't get justice beyond social media hashtags. The new app can help build a culture of justice and amplify voices in the fight against SGBV. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Earlier this week, Somalia's parliament approved the appointment of the country's new Prime Minister, Mohamed Hussein Roble. 215 lawmakers in attendance endorsed the nominee at a special session. The new premier is expected to form a cabinet in the coming weeks. However, his new government will again need to seek approval from parliament. Roble is expected to hold office for 5 months, after which the country will elect a new president. He replaces his predecessor, Hassan Ali Khaire, who was ousted by parliament after serving for 3 years.
The new Prime Minister and his government have a golden opportunity, the capacity, international experience and knowledge for the new position. We hope that he will fulfill the pledges he made following his appointment.
All right, we continue our special coverage of amazing Xinjiang. Our team of reporters is now in Taskogan. The city is constructed on a high, steep hill and is an oasis on the Silk Road. Yesterday, our reporters were visiting Jie village, which is famous for making traditional musical instruments.
The Pamir Plateau and the Tajiks, one of the oldest ethnic groups in China, view eagles as a symbol of heroism.
To understand the Tajiks living here, there's one thing you need to be aware of. The eagle flute. It's a symbol of the people on the Pamirs.
For centuries, Tajiks would imitate an eagle's sound with a flute.
哇，太棒了！这个表演，我们想了解一下这个鹰笛啊，是不是塔吉克民族最有代表性的艺术表演形式呢？
是的，但它还只是我们塔吉克族最有代表性的舞蹈，是鹦鹉的一部分。我邀请你来欣赏。
好，一定要来参加。
一定。
The dancer rings his waist and elbows and lifts his arms like an eagle soaring in the air.
那我现在想跟您学几个动作，这个鹦鹉呢怎么去表演呢？给我们教几个吧，好吗？
可以。
哦，怎么做呢？
就第一个那个鹦鹉飞的感觉。
哦。
这个左脚。
左脚。
前面，然后就拎着翅膀。
哦。
然后打开飞的感觉。
打开。
Could be performed solo or in pairs, as a hobby or as a performance at festivities and weddings. As bodies sway to the rhythm, there's confidence and happiness in each movement. And the Tajik eagle dance has been listed as a national intangible cultural heritage in China. This helps ensure it is protected and passed down through generations.
Let's now remind you of our top stories. In South Africa, a 6.1 magnitude earthquake struck offshore on Saturday. That's according to the U.S. Geological Survey. A subsequent tremor with a 2.3 magnitude struck the country's southern coastline on Sunday. According to the Council for Geoscience, this was the second tremor to strike the city of Cape Town. China's northeastern city of Xinjiang has received the remains of 117 Chinese war heroes who died in the Korean War. They were repatriated from South Korea. It's the 7th such transfer since Seoul and Beijing signed a handover agreement several years ago. And in Tunisia, thousands of agents are being deployed nationwide to enforce government health measures put in place to curb the spread of COVID-19. There are concerns of a second wave of infections in the country after a spike in coronavirus cases. That's a look at our top stories this hour. All right, coming up in business news. More African countries step up efforts to revive their tourism industries after COVID-19 disruptions.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Egypt has been holding a bike tour at its Red Sea resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh. The event celebrates World Tourism Day and invited dozens of foreign ambassadors to join in. The country's Ministry of Tourism is looking to promote its tourist attractions. Here's Adel Mahri with the details.
With care, hotel employees disinfect each bike. There's a VIP bike tour around Sharm el-Sheikh city. They want to make all details perfect. Egyptian ministers of tourism and aviation are hosting some 30 ambassadors and spouses to experience for themselves the Red Sea resort city.
Ambassador being with us, it's a message of support and solidarity with Egyptian tourism and with Egyptian people. They are coming here to visit the resorts, to assess and to see by their own eyes the measure that we are taking for the hygiene safety for their tourists.
This environment-friendly event aims to mark World Tourism Day, but instead of promoting through advertisements, Egypt is relying on the ambassador's experience to speak for itself.
To come and after the COVID, and the effort that Egypt is deploying to see that everything is going, the measures are being applied, and that everything is being done so that tourism will restart here. We saw it. We were very impressed. Bike rides, which is an ecotourism, and we really enjoyed it. Everybody enjoyed it. So, and I'm happy that I won the
As the winner of the short race, the Cameroonian ambassador will get exclusive access to the site of the next archaeological discovery, another move to market Egypt's various attractions. The tourism sector here has been hit hard after the COVID-19 pandemic. Occupancy rates reached zero at most hotels. That has greatly affected the income for at least 1 million Egyptians who work in hotels and resorts. More than 20 ambassadors have joined this bike tour around Sharm el-Sheikh city, and a great sign of collaboration to support tourism in this Red Sea resort city, to bring tourists here at a time this city needs it the most. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt.
South Africa will reopen its international borders on the 1st of October. The tourism industry was devastated when the country went into a hard lockdown at the end of March. Local tourism reopened last month, while international tourism is set to return from next month. Sumitra Naidu has more.
According to the Tourism Business Council of South Africa, the industry loses $19 million for every day that international borders are closed.
If I look at 2018, 2019, around 120 billion rand is generated from overseas through tourism. For every day that we have shut down our international borders, we lose around 336 million rand per day. If you look at the inbound travel, you're looking at around 300,000 people that are employed within the inbound travel and losing 336 million per day.
The government plans to reopen only 3 major airports for international arrivals from the 1st of October. International borders may be opening, but tour companies say it will take time to make up for the last 5 months.
I think it would be fair to say that it has been dramatic and traumatic at the same time. And it's not only about our own country closing our borders, it's also about the source markets closing their borders to the rest of the world. We ended up having to dramatically reduce our cost base going into this because we see this as a medium to long-term problem. We went from well over 6,000 staff to well under 3,000 staff.
The government has put strict protocols in place to ensure safety for tourists.
Only opening our borders will not lead to recovery. We think it's going to take 3 months after opening our borders till we see a trickle of reasonable tourism coming to this country. And we believe that it will take 2 to 3 years to get back to 2019 levels. In the short term, the consumer wants to be safe from infections. COVID protocols, staff training, execution of the COVID protocols are critical.
Look, one of the things that we've done since South Africa introduced the risk-adjusted strategy is to work on protocols, the safety protocols for the industry. Also, we look at the Department of Health, World Health Organization, and many other, places whereby, they've put together protocols to combat COVID. So we've done the same. We have de-risked the sector throughout the value chain. It is safe to travel to South Africa.
Most tourism companies say they're cautiously optimistic that international travelers will return in their numbers to visit the amazing beauty that South Africa has to offer.
Peninah Karibe for CGTN in Knysna in the Western Cape, South Africa.
So that is the case for South Africa. Let's now join Adel Mahroui live from Cairo to paint for us the case for Egypt. Adel, this Sunday is the World Tourism Day. What has Egypt been doing to encourage more international visits amid the COVID-19 disruptions?
Well, as you know, the Egyptian government in general relies heavily on tourism. It represents about up to 10% of the GDP and employment power in the country. So a lot of people are involved in the tourism industry. Since Egypt started lifting off its air restrictions and opening up hotels, the government has been moving tremendously with the tourism minister traveling to several countries abroad in Europe and beyond to invite visitors to come. This week he has invited over 20 ambassadors to show them the COVID-19 measures taking place in hotels. The government has been giving discounts, has been providing a lot of incentives for international community in general and countries that Egypt targets to come to Egypt at a cut-rated offered vacation and at the same time enjoy themselves intensively. According to these efforts, we've seen that European countries are starting gradually coming to Egypt. Next, British tourists are here, German are also here, and next month France announced that it will start giving the green light for its citizens to come to Egypt. Czech Republic is going also to open up next week with its first flight coming to Egypt. So there is progress on going to attract tourists to come here. And at the same time, the government is moving strictly to make sure that the COVID-19 measures, the preventive measures, are meticulously applied in all its resorts. Just this week, the tourism minister has rejected demand from hotels and resort owners to increase their capacity from 50% to 75%. The 50% has been a restriction by the government, and the tourism minister refused. Also, beside that, the tourism minister shuts down any hotel or resorts that violates the COVID-19 preventive measures. There have been several cases of hotels who have been shut down during the past months. And finally, he is not allowing any hotel or resort to lay off any of his employment to maintain that the service stay intact. When the world opens up, Egypt can welcome more tourists.
Okay, Adel, so talk to us more about the measures in place to support stakeholders in the Egyptian tourism sector.
So the government has been providing loans with a discounted rate, discounted interest rates for hotels because, as I mentioned earlier, the government is not allowing anyone to lay off their employees in this sector. And therefore, with very little income, we're talking about way less, from July till now, it's just less than 10% of the visitors who came in the same period last year. So it's now down to about 250,000 visitors came during the past couple of months, while in the same time last year there were more than 2.5 million. And because of that, the government is providing facilitations. It's cutting some of its tax required from any touristic institution. Rents for shop owners or souvenir shop owners in public areas like the pyramids, for example, have been waived. And also the government is trying to make sure that these institutions, the organizations and the company working in tourism sector can stretch any dues they have. So all their terms can be rescheduled, all their debts can be rescheduled. And at the same time, the government wants to maintain that whatever additional hygiene measure that has been required could be provided to them at the least cost possible. So we have institutions like the Egyptian Armed Forces, the Arab Organization for Industrialization. All our government industrial powers are now producing massively ethyl alcohol disinfectants, all the material needed for the population and the touristic sector to maintain its hygiene, safety, and all of these materials are provided at way much less cost than what the private sector has been offering.
All right, Adil, thank you for that. Adil Mahroui live in Cairo. Tunisia's small and medium enterprises have been alarmed by a possible second wave of infections in some regions as well as in Europe. Tunisia's SME sector has been struggling to recover after the nation's initial coronavirus outbreak earlier this year.
The Tunisian Confederation of Industry, Trade and Handicrafts, UTICA, called on the government to provide aid to thousands of small and medium-sized enterprises which have not recovered from the first wave of the pandemic. The Confederation warned businesses to prepare for a possible second wave.
The economic and social situation is alarming. We are wary of a second wave. The state and confederation of businesses must work together to boost the economy and limit the negative repercussions. There are many difficulties that we must overcome to save Tunisian enterprises.
The Bank for Financing Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, BFPME, revealed that about 17.6% of Tunisian SMEs are still at a total standstill, with no recovery in economic activity, while 50.4% of SMEs consider the recovery to be very slow and damaging.
Tunisian SMEs are suffering from structural problems. The COVID-19 pandemic has only deepened the crisis. The state and the bank have provided aid to small and medium-sized enterprises during the first wave of the virus. The second wave will be catastrophic. We are working on new mitigation measures.
In addition, the bank reported only 18.4% of Tunisia SMEs had benefited from government support in response to the COVID-19 crisis.
The bank and the National Institute of Statistics are still evaluating the repercussions of the first general lockdown on SMEs. The economy was paralyzed for more than 3 months. We will provide direct financial aid, but the exact amount has not been determined yet.
According to the National Institute of Statistics, 72.6% of the managers of small and medium-sized enterprises want to benefit from tax and social security extensions, tax cuts, and access to cash in the next 6 months. More than 40% of small and medium-sized enterprises in Tunisia are apprehensive of the second wave of COVID-19, believing that it could threaten their activity in the next 6 months. Experts assert that preserving jobs is the main challenge for over 3,000 SMEs. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
South Africa's media industry has not been spared by the COVID-19 crisis. President Cyril Ramaphosa has raised concern over sweeping job losses and the shutting of publications because of the coronavirus pandemic. CGTN's Julie Shire brings us the latest.
President Cyril Ramaphosa praised brave and tenacious journalists for their work during a risky time, but expressed concern that the industry is shrinking when accurate reporting is most needed.
There's been a bloodbath in the entire journalism industry in South Africa. Our colleagues have had their salaries cut.
or they have been retrenched. There have been massive retrenchments across the sector. I mean, newspapers have closed down, magazines in particular have also closed down. So it's a terrible time for journalism.
It's been a long time coming. We've seen for the past decade already that print media has had a very hard time coping with the shift to digital. And especially with the likes of Google and Facebook dominating global ad spend, that has really damaged print media in particular.
Digital news publication The Daily Maverick has managed to buck the trend. It's launching a weekly newspaper after being online for 11 years.
We produced this newspaper in the height of COVID lockdown in South Africa. We worked on a dummy, we worked on a pilot issue, totally remotely. And I think we're able to do that because the Daily Maverick is a digital-first publication. We have exceptional journalists. We produce 24/7. And I think because we're used to that culture of working on the fly.
For the rest of the industry, however, it's going to be a rough ride as advertising revenue, circulation and market share falls.
The outlook is bleak for South Africa's media industry. It will really come down to who will be the toughest with the best offerings.
There's an underlying problem for all industries, but particularly media, which is that we might be coming out of lockdown, but we're heading into a very deep recession. So you'll see further retrenchments, as we've already seen in the media industry, on a massive level.
South Africa has managed to contain the pandemic, but it's counting the costs of many livelihoods lost. Relief funds are available to struggling journalists. Government has committed to maintaining ad spend. And the president has urged South Africans to help by paying TV licenses, buying magazines and newspapers, and supporting crowdfunding initiatives. Julie Shah, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a quick break. Straight ahead. Milan Fashion Week shines the spotlight on multicultural design experiences.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Peninah, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The Italian fashion industry is giving a voice to 5 designers of color in a bid to reflect its multicultural structure. During the Milan Fashion Week starting Sunday, the We're Made in Italy project will highlight their work. Alex Fraser has more.
The models, influencers and major labels are back. A global pandemic couldn't stop Milan Fashion Week, but it has forced it into some changes. Temperature checks, face masks and much reduced numbers.
For most people, the closest they'll get to the catwalks this year is watching video, streamed online. Major designers including Emporio Armani, Versace and Prada are doing digital-only shows. But it's not just the virus that's shaking up this year's shows. During the summer, the only black Italian designer to have featured in Milan said she wouldn't return this year. Stella Jean and fellow designer Edward Buchanan sent a letter to the organisers of Fashion Week asking, "Do Black Lives Matter in Italian fashion?"
In response, the Chamber of Fashion are sponsoring an event where 5 Italian designers of colour will exhibit their work for the first time on the Milan Fashion Week calendar. The digital show is titled We're Made in Italy and is being organised by the Black Lives Matter in Italian fashion group. The designers are mentored by Jean and Buchanan. Michelle Francine Ngomo scouted the designers. She founded Afro Fashion Week, now in its 5th year. It's an event that has created an international platform for designers of African origin in Italy and abroad. Across the last few years, some of the biggest brands in Italy have been involved in racial controversy with insensitive designs. As the Black Lives Matter movement has gained traction, brands have tried to show solidarity through social media.
But Ngomo thinks the stance of some fashion houses is problematic.
The big brands, I won't say names, are more concerned about Black Lives Matter outside and not at home. I won't lie, we won't tell fairy tales because racism is also here in Italy.
Afro Fashion Week is running concurrently with Milan's main event. Joy Merabe's designs are some of those being showcased. She says stereotypes of African designers are a barrier for people of colour in fashion.
Most people basically think you are an ethnic designer, and most of the time they ask me, where is it made in? They don't agree, they don't believe that it's made in Italy. I have a constant struggle of trying to explain to people, I live in Italy, I work in Italy, everything is produced in Italy.
Frida Chiesa hopes both fashion weeks will expose Italian designers of colour to a global audience.
Today is also the opportunity to make the world understand that Made in Italy, created by Africans, exists. It's very emotional. We all feel Italian.
The week will also see events bringing together black creatives and representatives of major Italian brands to discuss race and diversity in Italian fashion. Fashion Week ends on September the 28th. Designers of colour hope it will mark the beginning of a more diverse and conscious industry. Alex Fraser, CGTN, Milan.
And ahead in sports. South Africans looking to grow in prominence at continental and global rally events.
Africa Live. Find your voice.